Sometimes I'm happy to say that I'm Arab, and what do I mean by that? Well, today's one of those days, and we know how good IGN is with their journalism, how good their game journalists are, and we're going to be looking at another dog water take by them. Today's topic is going to be about Resident Evil 5 and how it possibly cannot be made into a remake. IGN's recent video about the situation, so I wanted to go through it and break down certain points. I will try to not play the whole thing, but I want to play enough to give context about what they're saying. So let's give it a go.
It's clear that moving forward chronologically will take Capcom's remakes into the series' weakest era, an era of gameplay and narrative decisions best left in the past. Resident Evil 5 simply can't be remade, at least not to the standards of Capcom's best work. And so the answer is not to remake, but to rewrite.
Now, listening to the points that were being brought up, I would say at some certain points, yes, that is correct, where it failed in the sense that, oh, this is a Resident Evil game, but it doesn't hold up in the action or in the horror part, and it decided to go into a whole action way. That happened around the first time these games came out, where we saw like Dead Space 3 go the action route. We saw so many different games that used to be just horror based turn into these action-packed set pieces. And yeah, I believe in this scenario, they are right, where they just should go back to their roots and try to make it a little more scary. But at the same time, we can't forget that we are at a point in the Resident Evil story where now we are seeing military action. So at this point, it would make sense that we would see a more action angle. That's just how I see it.
Resident Evil 5 is an action game through and through. That's evident in its cover shooter mechanics, vehicle chases with on-rails turret sequences, and the constant rattle of assault rifles. Even its visual design evokes the sandy shades of modern military games that experienced mass popularity in the late 2000s. It all speaks to a series that had lost its way. Rather than reflect on the tenets that were the foundation of its experience, Resident Evil 5 looked to the contemporary gaming zeitgeist in an attempt to find a new lease of life. The result is an unholy hybrid of Resident Evil, Gears of War, and Call of Duty. It's as ugly and unwieldy as it sounds.
Talking about how they are pointing to this direction, that is true. They reached to a point that they decided to push into a certain direction, and they tried to stick with it. But calling it ugly and stuff like that, that's a little too harsh, because they tried to do something new, and to a certain degree, for when it originally came out, it succeeded with what they did. And I don't get why now it's just something so horrible.
Through the use of enemies that were strategically placed to provide undulating waves of tension and fear, and the inclusion of Ashley as your vulnerable charge, combat encounters were focused on surviving overwhelming horrors rather than dominating foes. Resident Evil 5, meanwhile, presents its enemies as waves to be gunned down with increasingly powerful weaponry. Their purpose is cannon fodder, a wall of meat to slow your progress through levels. And those levels are not locations to be explored. Instead, they are largely funnels that push you from entrance to exit. Resident Evil 4 may have replaced the series' traditional continuous structure with discrete levels in an attempt to move away from the backtracking-heavy design of previous games, but it preserved the spirit of locations like the Raccoon City police station. The village, Salazar's castle, and the island feature interlocking, explorable pathways that solidify these locations as authentic spaces rather than obstacle courses. Resident Evil 5 has no interest in this, with the majority of its stages being little more than corridors peppered with dead ends to hide treasures in. Their lack of authenticity means no one will ever mention the Kajuju Autonomous Zone in the same breath as the Spencer Mansion.
Resident Evil 3, Resident Evil 4, Resident Evil 2, 1, they all had their iconic areas. They had the Spencer Mansion, Raccoon City, RPD, all these places. That is true. I will tell you from now, Resident Evil 5 was my first Resident Evil, and I love it. But for the life of me, I cannot mention any specific levels or locations. I can tell you specific instances of things happening. Let's say the bat boss or the troll boss or the beginning entrance, or the beginning moments of the game where you are walking into a compound and they notice you. I can tell you about these encounters, but I can tell you about the location or the set pieces. They are correct in this.
A whole new environmental structure and scenario design that reins in the action and dials up the horror would bring it in line with Capcom's other remakes. But all of this doesn't account for Resident Evil 5's most notorious problem: racism. Set in a fictional West African country, Resident Evil 5's primary antagonists are black people. Yes, it's technically the Ouroboros virus that protagonist Chris Redfield is fighting, but the parasite's host is depicted as a nation of mobs and primitives who are violent even before their infection. Intentionally or not, Resident Evil 5 positions Africa as the Dark Continent, an uncivilized world harboring a diseased population that needs gunning down via Western intervention in the name of global security. This insensitive treatment of people of colour was hotly debated even as early as Resident Evil 5's debut trailer, with writers such as Ngai Kroll and Stephen Totilo pointing out the game's uncomfortable post-colonial imagery. The arguments and think pieces continued well into the game's release window.
Racism? Really? Are we really trying to push for that? Like, we didn't hear anything about this when it came to Resident Evil 4, where it was an American going to a European village and gunning down the villagers that were just minding their own business because there was just another evil person that decided to kidnap and harbor someone in that area. Where's the treatment for both of those? And he even said it in the video. They are infected people. They're fighting the Ouroboros. They're fighting the frickin' infection. They are dealing with, still, Resident Evil, we are dealing with zombies. We aren't dealing with normal people that are just hostile. No, they put it out there that these people are infected. They're not just random people that that Chris decided that he should gun down for the sake of America, or the BCAA or BSAA, whatever corporation he fights for. Where did this even come from? Is it just because you're white and everybody that you see, your enemies that are zombies, are black? Where did this even come from?
In the 2020s, in a post-Black Lives Matter world, there is only one acceptable response to a white man shooting waves of Africans for an entire video game: no.
I'll say it out loud. For that point that you just said, no. That is a really shitty take to have. A video game is a video game. If I were to go to a character creation game and I make my character white and I go and gun down black people in a game, or let's say I take frickin' GTA 5 Trevor or Michael and I just run around and I just kill black people, that doesn't make a difference. It doesn't matter. Why now are we having such a big issue about this when we've always had it in these other games? Just because of things that have happened in reality doesn't mean it should be put into video games. There's supposed to be a freaking disconnect. If politics is always going to be brought up into these games, then we should no longer just make video games for fun. We should make video games always to send a certain message. If you're just going to be thinking that way, then that's really just garbage thinking. It's a video game, it's a disconnect.
Remakes may be able to redefine their source material, but there's only so many changes you can make until it's not a remake at all, but an entirely new game. And if you take Africa out of Resident Evil 5, is it Resident Evil 5 anymore? Even with a vastly improved, more sensitive take on the continent, perhaps one with a black protagonist and a more empathetic look at the outbreak, the experience would simply be too divorced from the original to hold the name Resident Evil 5.
You would rather have black on black. You literally said you would rather have black on black. You just care at the fact that it's Chris Redfield and not a black character. Even though we do have a partner in this game, and this partner is not just a if we're gonna connect it to Resident Evil 4, isn't just a freaking damsel in distress that every time we want her to do something like Ashley, she just gets taken away and game over immediately. No, you actually had someone that you would benefit from, someone that could protect you, someone that could heal you, do stuff for you. And guess what? She's black, she's part of their military, and she's helping out Chris Redfield in this operation. Is it because that she's black and she's helping out Chris that now it turns out that Sheva Alomar is freaking denouncing her black heritage because she's fighting for or with Chris? What kind of garbage take is that? It doesn't make it better if the main character is black. Who thought this was a good point? Those were my points that I had about this video. I honestly cannot believe I agreed with a couple of points. That is true. There were a couple of things that, like, I would say I do not remember from Resident Evil 5 because they were just not memorable. And when it came to Resident Evil 6, the one that came right after, it was pretty much just an action game. It took the frickin' Dead Space 3 route and it cut out everything horror. And like, other than the monsters, yes, that is true. Other than the monsters, you couldn't tell that it was a Resident Evil game. And it's sad that they did that because Resident Evil is a really good series. And if anything needs to be remade, Resident Evil 5 deserves to be remade, given the same treatment as like Resident Evil 2, not even, I think even 2 and 3, they had their slight changes. I, for one, would love to play Resident Evil 5 again, except with the third person shooting as Resident Evil 2 and 3 Remake instead of the frickin' tank movements, because I love the game, but I hate tank movements, and now coming off of those games, I cannot go back. But finishing from that video, I wanted to look at the original IGN review, might I add, of Resident Evil 5 and see what kind of verdict they came to. So let's look at it. So the first ever IGN Resident Evil 5 review was posted on March 7th, 2009. So we're looking all the way back there, and just read the frickin' title. It says, Resident Evil 5 Review, Capcom's beloved survival horror series gets an extreme makeover. So they even knew that there were big changes. So I decided to read through this review, and I found some interesting points, and they are complete paragraphs that I will read out, and I will keep as much of the original context if possible. So let's look at this part. The citizens of Kijuju are going through some ugly changes, many of which involve tentacles, oozing eyeballs, and heretofore unexplored bloodlust. And as is the custom in Resident Evil game, you drop into a situation woefully unprepared for what awaits. The resulting experience is an intense, action-packed adventure replete with satisfying combat, tight gameplay, and gorgeous, well-crafted environments. Resident Evil 5 offers all those things and then some, but it doesn't do many of the things longtime fans of the series expect. It won't scare you. It won't fill you with creeping desperation. It won't have you collecting and counting bullets like they're precious stones. It won't, in essence, make you feel like you're playing a traditional Resident Evil game. That is true. Now we'll look at a different part of it. There's been a fair amount of media discussion around the question of whether Resident Evil 5 has racist overtones due to its African setting and the fact that the main character, at least on the first playthrough, is a white man shooting black people in their native land. I personally didn't find Resident Evil 5 to have an overtly racist feel, but I did find one aspect of it a bit disturbing. It was a bit strange to realize I was wandering around Africa stealing the region's gold, precious gems, and expensive native treasures, which I then cashed in to pay for weapon upgrades, and in the fact that I end up killing the parasitically infected villagers and townspeople of the area with said weapons, and the discomfort comes full circle. But I long ago lost count of the number of video games I've played whose in-game economies, storylines, and the character motivations made absolutely no sense, and I suppose the people of Kijuju won't be needing their treasures anymore. Anyway, seeing as they have all been infected with a parasite and then killed by me, consider it money well spent on ridiculously powerful weapons. This dude, what's his name? I gotta look at who wrote this article. Please, let me look at this. Freaking Ryan Jeeds understands it. He said that, it looks like a white man is shooting black people, but there should be a suspension of belief where, well, we're not in actually Africa, we're in a fictional thing based around Africa. And what do we usually find around Africa? We find black people, and then some more. They are all infected, and they have been taken advantage of. By who, might I add? They were taken advantage of by white people. You can't look at this and tell me that, oh, now it's a big issue. It was never a big issue. People wanted to make it an issue just so they could have something to talk about. And it's become very prevalent because, oh, we just finished from Resident Evil 4 Remake. Oh, what comes up next? Capcom, are you going to do it or not? Let's look at IGN's original Resident Evil 5 rating. And they gave it a 9 out of 10. What are we looking at now? If you gave it in 2009... a 9 out of 10. What is it rated now? You can't tell me, oh, because of these things, now it's a 3 out of 10. I'll give it to you, maybe now, if we were to look at it from a modern sense, I would say the only thing that you could say that, oh, it would knock it down to like a 6 or a 7, something like that. Maybe just the fact that it's tank controls. That's about it. But you cannot tell me anything else. And that was IGN's review, or their topic on Resident Evil 5 becoming a remake. And I would like to say that even though there were points that I agreed with, the major point in this whole video is complete dog water and does not have any basis, and it's a topic that they want people to be outraged by. And it did its job, but I think it kind of backfired where it did its job except in the other way. And I really do hope that we see a Resident Evil 5 remake, because Resident Evil 5 is my, it was my first. And I would love to experience it again. I loved the story of Sheva Alomar, Chris Redfield, Jill Valentine, Albert Wesker, Excella. I think her name was Excella, one of them. One of the, and then that, I guess he was a white South African. All in all, the only thing that I have to say is the person that made this IGN video, you know what they should do? They should take the RE5 logo and take that IGN logo and put them together, and that's what they should do. If you like this video, hey, drop a like and subscribe. If you didn't like this video, I'm not going to tell you not to dislike it. Go right ahead. And I hope to see you here next time. See you.